Today's daf is Menachos daf Kuf Yud, the very last daf of Maseches Menachos, and we are 5 lines from the bottom of daf Kuf Tes Amid Beis Tanya Amir Rabbi Yeshua ben Prachya. Today's daf is being learned as a schus refuah shalema for Leah bas Tzipora Fega and Tova Rivka bas Vittel Nechama. Before we begin, I just want to say that I have the schus today to learn the last daf from a Bamberg Gemara that was printed in the year 1522. So, just want to give a Greisi Yashakayach to Gamliel Danziger for being Mezaka, the Olam. This is a Gemara that's survived over 500 years, and you can imagine what this Gemara saw and the amount of amelus that's eingezapt in the oisios and in the blätter of this Gemara. It's Taka Schus, and on that note, the last daf of Maseches Menachos. Tanya, Rabbi Yeshua ben Prachya. We learned in a brayso, Rabbi Yeshua ben Prachya said, Betchila, I used to say that Kol Omer Leired law, and that if somebody would tell me to go and have some level of gedula, I would be very, very upset, because I would feel that I'm not interested in having this gedula that's being offered to me. As a matter of fact, I would take this person, I would tie him up, I would put him in front of an ari. Ata, now, now if somebody tells me, Fakerd, come away. This, by the way, is the 1522 Bamberg Gerson, the Gemara. If somebody would tell me to go away from this gedula, animatal olav kumkum shalchamim, to the contrary, I would take hot water. I didn't remember this being the Gersa when I was preparing the daf. I would take hot water and I would pour it on top of him because fakir. Now already I'm interested in the gula. In other words, Rabbi Yeshua ben Prachi said that I used to be a beirech menakavit. If somebody offered me gedula, I would say, I don't want the gedula. I don't want to have anything to do with this. But now that I got used to it, I was a toyim from the Eitz Hadas already. So if somebody goes and fakir, he's not mechabed me in the right way, he tells me step down. To the contrary, I would take a kumkum shalmayim and I would pour it over him. And Rabbi Yeshua ben Prachi said, I'll even bring you a precedent for this. You shouldn't think this is my chiddush, that I'm the first person ever to get used to a little bit of kavod. This already goes back to the times of Nach. Shari Shaul, Baruch Mimeno. Shaul in the beginning didn't want to have anything to do with being the Melech. Ukesha'Allah, however, as soon as he became king, and all of a sudden he found out that there was somebody that was challenging his Malchus. Who was that? David HaMelech. Bikesh Shlargas David. Already he wanted to kill David. So Shaul did a 180 pretty quickly. He went from not wanting to have anything to do with Malchus to all of a sudden, there's a Havamina, somebody might be more qualified than me. Said Rabbi Yeshua ben Prachi, I was a victim of this. This is something that I myself experienced. We're going to get back to this momentarily. Markashisha Bered Rav Chizda told Abaye, Rameir Haikra de Rabbi Yehuda my Ovidlai. So in yesterday's daf, we had a machlokes Rameir and Rabbi Yehuda regarding Beis Chanyai. Was Beis Chanyai a Beis Avodah Zarah, or was it a place that they were bringing karbanos l'shem shemayim to HaKadosh Baruch Hu? Rabbi Yehuda held that the karbanos were being brought l'shem shemayim. Rabbi Meir held it was a Beis Avodah Zarah. Rabbi Yehuda supported his position from a pasuk in Nach that says there's going to be a day where in Mitzrayim they're going to bring in karbanos to Hashem. So Mark Kashisha, who was the son of Rav Chizda, turned to Abaya and he told him, what does Rameir do with that pasuk? It seems to be a pasuk that suggests that there will be a time and place where in Mitzrayim they're going to bring in karbanos to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So if it doesn't mean Beis Chanya, it has to mean something else. So he wanted to know what exactly is it referring to. So he told me, I'll explain to you where that nevuah was neskayim with the following price. After Sancheriv had his big mapala, so we're familiar with the story of Sancheriv and Chizkiyahu Melech. We like to say that after the miracles of Yetzias Mitzrayim, that might be certainly in the conversation of the next greatest miracle or series of miracles of all time. But either way, after Sancheriv's militaire miraculously was defeated, Yatsa Chizkiyahu, so Chizkiyahu, who had been stuck in Yerushalayim because of the siege, he was able to leave. Umatza b'nei Malachim, and when he left, he saw princes non-Jewish princes. And they were sitting on chariots that were made of gold. Chizkiyahu said, listen, you want to live? Yeah, we want to live. Okay, well, here's the deal. You're going to have to make sure that you're not going to be Oved Avodah Zarah. They're pagans, but Avodah Zarah is one of the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach. He told them, you can't be Oved Avodah Zarah. How do we know? The Pasuk says, Be'emahu yiyeh Chamesh Arim, the Eretz Mitzrayim. There's going to be 4 cities in the land of Mitzrayim. Medabri Sfas Canaan. They're going to speak the language of Canaan. Rashi says, what's the language of Canaan? Says it's obviously Lashon Kodesh, which is a language that's spoken in the land of Canaan. But it's interesting that Rashi's picking up on Sfas Canaan. I never heard of such a language. The Nishpatu Lashem Tzvakois, and they're going to swear to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Either way, Holchul Alexandria Shal Mitzrayim, these chevra that were allowed to live by Chizkiyahu HaMelech ended up going to Alexandria Shal Mitzrayim, Ubanu Mizbeach, they built a Mizbeach, Vehelu Olav L'Shum Shamayim, they brought Karbanos over there, L'Shum Shamayim, Shenema B'Yomahu Yeh Mizbeach L'Hashem B'Toich Eretz Mitzrayim. That's the pasuk that Rabbi Yehuda had brought as support for his shita, that Beis Chanya was a place that they were bringing karbanos leHakadosh Baruch Hu. The question was, what did Rameir do with it? Rameir held that these karbanos were being brought by the Bnei Melachim that Chizkiyahu HaMelech allowed to live on the condition that they wouldn't be Oved Avodah Zarah. Ultimately, he sent them to these 5 cities in Mitzrayim, and they were bringing karbanos. Not in the Beis HaMikdash, obviously, this is a Mitzrayim, but at the same time, they were being brought to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, they were swearing L'Hashem Tzvakos, with some level of Avodah al Kapanim, but the bottom line is, that's what this pasuk is referring to. Now, the pasuk over there concludes and says, Ir HaHeres Yeyomer le'echas. So the Gemara says, my Ir HaHeres, meaning one of those 5 cities. The pasuk mentions Chamish Arim Beretz Mitzrayim. That's where these chevra ended up going. One of them is called Ir HaHeres. What exactly is that? So the Gemara says, Kid Metargim Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef, who was a famous Metargim, so he was Metargim the word Ir HaHeres. He said, Karta de Beis Shemesh. It's the city of Beis Shemesh. The Asid Lemichrav, which at one point will be destroyed, and Isamer di Chad Minhoy. The pasuk is saying this was one of those 5 cities. The Gemara says, "We might the Ir HaHeres Lishno the Shemesh." How did Rabbi Yosef know that Ir HaHeres is Beis Shemesh? It must have been because he held that the word Heres means Shemesh. Shemesh is the sun. Beis Shemesh is a city, but Shemesh literally means a sun. So Ir HaHeres, he's being metargem, is the city of the sun. Where does Heres come to sun? The pasuk says, "Ha'omer lecheres v'lo yizarach." So Cheres relates to shining. Cheres and Heres, even though it's not the same word, but it's like Chanukah and Hanukkah. They're interchangeable, right? We know in Halacha even, sometimes you find Gemaras that the Ches and the Hey interchange. Either way, that's what this is referring to. The pasuk says, Heviu banayich meirachoik uvnoisayich miktzei haaretz. So we're talking about people worshiping in Mitzrayim, in distant lands. We're talking about Chizkiyahu being mashpia on these Bnei Melachim and getting them to let go of their Avodah Zarah and to stop worshiping HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So me'inyan le'inyan, a little bit me'yoseh inyan. So the Gemara, the pasuk says, Haviu b'naich me'rachoik, that in the times of the Geula, your sons are going to come from distant places. Ubnoisayich miktzei haaretz. And your daughters, they're going to come literally from the ktzei haaretz. So it sounds like the boys and the girls are coming from different places. The b'naich are coming me'rachoik, but the b'noisayich are coming from the ktzei haaretz. So the Gemara explains, Haviu b'naich me'rachoik, what is referring to? Amar Rav Huna ilu Galia shal Bavel. That's referring to the it's referring not to the boys versus the girls, but it's referring to the Yidden that were in Galus and Bavel. The Yidden that were in Galus and Bavel, they were like boys. What does it mean they were like boys? Rashi says boys are calmer. They have less nerve than women. So Rashi. So Shadaitam Yusheves Aleim Kabanim. As a result, that's Rashi had daughters, Kiyadua. But that's Shadaitam Yusheves Aleim Kabanim. Ubnoisayich Miktzei Haaretz. What is that referring to? Elu Golios Shal Shalarotzos. That's referring to the Yidden, again, not the girls per se, but the Yidden that went into Golos to Shalarotzos. She'intaitam Yusheves Aleim Kebanos, that their das is not meyushav aleim, they're really like banos. Amar Rab Abba bar Rab Yitzchak, Amar Rab Chizav, Amar Rab Yehuda, Amar Rav. Mitzur va'ad Kartigni from Tzur, that's the ancient land of Tyre. We spoke about Tyre most recently in the Tcheles controversy. But from Tyre until Kartigni, Makirin es Yisrael v'savim shebashamayim. So in that area, because of the influence of the Jews, everyone was makir Klal Yisrael, and they're makir avim shebashamayim. They're makir the Beirei Olam. Umitzur klapi ma'ariv, but if you go from Tyre towards the west, umikartigni klapi mizrach, and then you go from Kartigni to the east. So clearly, Kartigni is to the mizrach; it's to the east of Tzur. So in that area, that huge parcel of geography, from Tzur to Kartigni, that area makirin es Yisrael v'sabim shebashamayim. But if you go west of Tzor and east of Kartigni, over there, ein makirin es Yisrael v'lo yasavim shebashamayim. They're not makir HaKadosh Baruch Hu. They're not makir Klal Yisrael. The Gemara is that true. Eisvei Reb Simi Bar Chiel the Rav. Simi Bar Chiel asked Rav Akasha. The pasuk says, "Mizrach shemesh v'ad mevoyoi gadol shmi bagoyim ubechol makoim mukter mugish l'shmi umincha tahira." What was the kasha? The kasha was that the pasuk says, "Mi mizrach shemesh v'ad mevoyoi gadol shmi bagoyim," which means "Mi mizrach shemesh v'ad mevoyoi." It means from where the sun rises in the east to where it sets in the west. If you remember from the Haggadah Shir, we spoke out from the Barbanel. That's how you teach this pasuk. Mizrach shemesh v'ad mevoyoi is not from the morning until evening, because that would imply you only thank Hashem from Alois until Shkia, and then from Shkia until Alois Malazach Volgai. No, Chalila. Mi mizrach shemesh means from east until west. It's identification of the makim. But the pasuk even goes weiter and says, "Ubechol makim," everywhere. Mukter mugash l'shmi mincha Torah. The world's bringing karbanos to me. Now you're telling me from the west of the Mississippi and from the east of the Chveisnish, all of a sudden no one's makir the Beirei Olam. How could you have such a thing? So the Gemara says, "Amalei." So Rav heard this kasha that Simi Bar Chiel asked him, and he told him, "Simiyat, are you Simi?" Sounds familiar. We have a raid bite called "Are You Simi?" That's the name. Where we spoke at a whole arichis on this Indian of Simiyat. But he told him, "Simiyat, the karileh Eloka the Eloha." Meaning, it's true. The chevra all over the world, everybody's makir the Beirei Olam. There's no one that's not makir the Beirei Olam. That's a true statement. Mi mizrach shemesh v'ad mevoyoi gadol shmi bagoyim ubechol makom mukter mugash l'shmi umincha tahira. Stating that there are places where at the same time they're karilol HaKadosh Baruch Hu l'kadol l'kadol. What does that mean? It means they're also makir the avodah zarah. Meaning they're makir bereishis bar l'kim es hashemayim v'sa'aretz. On some level they chap that there's a Beirei Olam that's the God of all gods. The problem is, it's the God of all gods. And they're makir those other gods. Now, it's actually interesting, because in Tefillah, we refer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu as Elokeinu Elohim, right? So the etzem concept of saying that is fine. But when we say Elohim, we mean it like Elohim Acherim, right? Obviously, we're not saying it in a respectful way. We're not saying, oh, there are multiple gods, but HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Oila al Kulana. They believe in the power of those other gods. And it's for that reason, although it's true, they are makir HaKadosh Baruch Hu, hence, mi mizrach shemesh v'ad mevoyoi gadol shmi bagoyim. And it could be they even bring sacrifices to him. Ubechol makom mukter mugish l'shmi umincha Torah. But at the same time, they're also makir these other gods, and that is what Rav meant when he said from the west of Tyre and from the east of Kartigni, in these places, in a makirin as Yisrael, v'loi as avim shebashamayim. So just to come up for breath for 1 second. So the first Gemara that we learned this morning was Tanya, Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Prachya, Betchila, and we read it again from a 1522 Italian Gemara. The Girsa was, Betchila, Kol ha'omer li reid la, ani koivsoi v'noisnoi lefnei ari. Ata kol ha'omer li alei mimeno, ani matel olav kumkum shalchanem. If you look in a Gemara that was printed more recently, the Gerus is just the opposite. Tanya, Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Prachya, Betchila kol ha'omer aleila, ani koivsa v'noisnoi lefnei ari. Ata kol ha'omer li leired mimeno, ani matel olav kumkum shalchanem. The truth is that if you take a look at Rashi already, you see, was struggling a little bit in terms of what the proper girsa of the Gemara was. Rashi, in fact, brings two pshatim. Had to learn Posh Pshat in the Gemara. And these two Pshatim are very interesting because they're not nuanced Pshatim, but they're like mamish from sea to shining sea. As a matter of fact, one of Rashi's two Pshatim is a very Lamdish Inyan. Another one of Rashi's Pshatim is a very Agadata Digga Inyan. Now we went with Rashi's second Pshat, which is the more Agadata Digga Inyan. And that is, Rabbi Shua ben Prachya was saying that I used to be a Beirech min Agdula, But once I fell into it and I was toying it a little bit, now if somebody tries to take me down, he better be careful, because he's going to be literally hit with a kumkum shalchamin over his head. So you better look in your rear view mirror to make sure I'm not coming for you, right? That's basically what Rabbi Shimon ben Prachi said. And of course the backstory, like Rashi speaks that, is Rabbi Shimon ben Prachi was the Nasi, Kiyudua, and it's for that reason Rabbi Shimon ben Prachi is someone who from experience is talking about, how exactly his relationship with the Nasias evolved over time. But before Rashi brings this pshat, he brought a first pshat. The first pshat is completely different. Rabbi Shimon ben Prachi was actually going back to the Mishnayos and the Sugyas, the Shveres Sugyas of the last few dafin, where if somebody says Harei Olai Oyla versus Harei Zu Oyla, Betchila Kol Omer Aleilah, not Aleilah, ascend to this podium and to this pedestal and to this gedula. But if somebody would say Oyla Alai, not Aleilah, but Alei miloshen oila and la alai. If somebody would say harei alai oila, because of the fact that when you say harei alai oila, you makabel achrayas, and because of the fact toiv asher lo yisidar me asher sidar v'lo yisashalem, which is a sugya arucha mesechnes adarm. Oh, and by the way, it's also tomorrow's daf. Chulin daf beis features very, very prominently this Indian of a person is not supposed to make an eder. So because of the fact that when a person makes an eder, he's makabel achrayis, and it's chal ochiv, akavta de gaver, to make sure he's going to fulfill it. So it's for that reason, if somebody would say Aleilah or Oyla Olai, and he koivsoi v'noisnoi lefnei ari, I would be very upset at him. Now already I have a different mahalach towards it. But it was related to that sugya ayin sham. If you take a look at Tosfos, Tosfos tells us the rest of the story. Tosfos says, V'Rabbeinu Kloinimus, it's in the middle of the last Tosfos on Kuftes Amid Beis, Aviv shel Rab Meshulam. Rabbeinu Kloinimus, who was the father of Rab Meshulam, Higia Koloshin Sheni. He was Magia, like the second shot. You see, this was such a tumult. What the right shot in this Gemara is. Say he was Magia Koloshin Sheni B'Shas P'tirasai, at the time that he died. V'Hasoifer Ta Bein Alei La'oila. And he said that the Sefer made a mistake between the word Alei to the word Oila, and he fears that this Reb Kloinimus Aviv Shel Rabbeinu Meshulam was Magia three things, ki mipi nevuah b'shas p'tirasai, and it was like a nevuah. See, he was lying on his deathbed, and then all of a sudden, mamish, as if he had a revelation, he said, there's three things that have to be Magia in Shas, and it was Magia one, and the other, and the other, and Tosfos goes and even mentions what the others were, but one of them is this Gemara. It's so interesting, by the way, this was mamish not planned, that we started the Gemara with a 1522 Shas that has a third Gersa, but you see how far plunter this Gersa was, staka fascinating. But the bottom line is that was this idea that Rabbeinu Kloinimus Aviv Shel Rab Meshulam was Magia b'Shas P'tirasi. It was Kumpi Anavua. I saw Rabbi Margolis in his Netzut Seyar. He says that here you have one of the Rishonim, Rabbeinu Kloinimus Aviv Shel Rab Meshulam. He's on his deathbed, and all of a sudden he had this Ruach Nevuah to be Magia three things. He says it's pashit that the tzushtal to this is that you find different places in Shas, but the Gemara says different tzaddikin, b'Shas p'tirasan, all of a sudden they were overwhelmed by some nevuah. He quotes three Gemaras. The Gemara says in Sanhedrin Yud Aleph Amar Aleph, Shmuel HaKatan Amar b'Shas p'tirasai, Shmuel HaKatan said b'Shas p'tirasai, Shimon v'Yishma l'charava, v'chavroi l'ktara, v'shar Amal l'biza. He literally started making predictions and prognostications about what was going to take place in the future. The Gemara says in Sanhedrin Kuf Aleph, K'shecholu Rabbi Eliezer, Nichnasu Talmidav Etzloi, Amar lehem, Chama Aza Yesh Ba'olam. Right, Eliezer felt something. He quotes the Gemara Kedushin, Ayin Beis Amar Aleph, Ayin Sham. Truth is, this is an Indian that we've spoken about many times over the years. V'zois habrach ashaberach Moshe. When did he do it? It was Lefnei Moshe. That Barbanel has a whole arichas in the beginning of Parashas V'zois habracha, that it was Daiko Lefnei Moshe, because Lefnei Moshe, a person has a certain Ruach Nevuah. He taps into a certain Indian. He says that's why Yitzchak Avinu gave his brachas Lefnei Moshe. That's why Yaakov Avinu gave his brachas Lefnei Moshe. Yaakov Avinu Lefnei Moshe, he said, hey, right? What's going to happen? It was Daika Lefnei Moshe, because that's when he came to this Ruach Nevuah that a person's able to come to. We've said over many times, Zohar HaKadosh says, a person can't see HaKadosh Baruch Hu and live, but once he's about to die, at that point he already could see HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The bottom line is, this is an Indian that we Meirich Reb David Weiss in the beginning of Parshas V'zayis HaBracha, that's Pshat in the Kesef Mishnah, in Hilchos Tumas Saras, where the Kesef Mishnah says that if somebody says something b'shas P'tirasa, it's beged the Torah L'B'Shamayim, because at that point it's a Bechin of Nevuah, because he's tapped in already to this, grace Inyan. The bottom line is, this is another Maramakim. Tosfos tucked away here in the end of Menachos Kuf Tesam and Beis, L'shoynei Azav Shal Tosfos, that Rabbeinu Kloinim is Aviv Sharam Meshulam Igia, Koloshin Sheni b'shas P'tirasa, V'shloishe Dvarim Igia Ki Mipi Nevuah. That he was Zeicha to Azam Mipi Nevuah right at the time of his Patir. But I want to mention another Ara that I saw in the Nitzot Seyar from Rabbi Ruven Margolis, and this only Rabbi Ruven Margolis could do. Kach nirla niyaz daiti. And that is, what did Rabbi Shua ben Prachia say? He said, Betchila, whatever the girsa is, right? Tais has 2 girsais, we have 3 girsais, but whatever the right girsa is, he said in the beginning, I felt, let's go with Rashi's Pshat, that if somebody wanted to fakoif me gedula and he koifsev and noisem lefnei ari, I would literally tie him up and put him for Ari. But now, if somebody tells me go away from it, I would take a kumkum shal mayim and I would pour it on top of him. It's funny mishalim, right? Koifsev lefnei ari, I would pour a kumkum shal chamim. It's like Rabbi Margolis. He said it's pasha. V'soid hamakbila. He says if you want to atzushtel to this ari v'kumkum shal chamim, right? Take a look at the Gemara in Yevamos Kuf Chaf Aleph Amar Aleph. That's in the sugya of agunois, and the Gemara talks about how if a person was seen to be in a very vulnerable situation and now he hasn't been heard from again, so is his wife mutter? Is his wife aser? So he says the Gemara says as follows: Nafalu guvarayos. If somebody fell into a guvarayos, lashon Gemara with an aleph, right? He was mamish in a lion's den. Ein me'idan aleph. You can't be made that he died because maybe he was like Daniel b'guvarayos. Maybe he was able to get out. But if somebody falls into boiling hot wine, oil, or water, mi'idin olav, you could be made that he for sure died. So he says, you see a braisa, that's negeya halach and hilchas agunos, that if somebody's lefnei ari, it's very bad. Oh, but ain't mi'idin olav, because maybe he's still alive. But if somebody is submerged in boiling hot liquid, mi'idin olav, there's no way he can make it out. That's what Rabbi Shua ben Prachia said. He says, mitchila, I was a sonei asagdula. Ad kidei kach, I would have been koivsoi lefnei ari. He said, but now that I got used to it, I enjoy it so much that if somebody takes me away, I'm going to go more than that. Not only will I be koivsi ibnei ari, which is pretty bad, where the analytics don't look good for that person to make it out alive. Oh, but the mice in me'idin olav, I'm going to pour a kumkum shal chamen on this. Mom is brilliant. I'll pour a kumkum shal chamen on him. Either way, on that note, moving along. Zok the heilige Gemara. So we just mentioned that the pasuk says that mi mizrach shemesh va'ad mevoyoy gadol shmi bagoyim ubechal makoim mukter mugesh l'shmi umincha tahira. So b'derech agav, the Gemara now is going to darshan this pasuk. It's interesting. If you're following the paper trail of how we got to the drasha that we're about to present, because we just mentioned the pasuk about how the Umoy Sa'olam Amakar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which was related to one thing, which was related to another, which traces itself back to Beis Chonyai, right? So this is like a digression, ben benoishal digression, mamish at soif kol ha'olam v'chol yotzei chalasa, right? This is like already the 8th pivot in the digression. But the truth is, really, the Gemara and the Gemaras that we're about to learn are so appropriate for the last Amud of Masechtas Menachos, because we're about to be Messiah Masechtas Menachos, which in a way means we're about to be Messiah in Zvachim and Menachos, right? Very much a 2 Masechta series, Achash Yishtayim. Next Masechta, even though we're still going to be in Seder Kachim, but it's Masechtas Chulin, it's a whole different Indian. Chulin is the antithesis of Kachim, right? Al Rishonim Anu Mitzdarim, why Chulin is in Kachim, right? Ein locha aksim moran gedolim mizu. But at the same time, we're about to be Messiah, Zvachim and Menachos, and very, very befitting that the Gemara brings now the drasha and really the ensuing drashas that we're about to see. And these next Gemaras are very, very famous. Right, you take this pasuk literally, it sounds like a person can bring karbanis anywhere he wants. So today, right? If the weather was a little nicer, you can go outside and you can bring a carbon. Chalila, right? What is the solka daitach? No way in the world you can't do this. So the Gemara, I'm Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani, I'm Rabbi Yonasan. So Shmuel Nachmani said the name of Rabbi Yonasan. I'll tell you what the pasuk means. Elo tamid chacham. It's referring to tamid chacham. Ha'iskim b'Torah b'chol makom. They're oisik in Torah b'chol makom. Malani aleim. And when they're oisik in Torah, I will consider it ki'ilu maktirim umagishin lishmi. I'm going to consider as if they're bringing karbanis. Their Torah that they're learning will be nechshav as if they're bringing karbanis. Umincha tahira. What does that mean? Meaning, what's a mincha tahira as opposed to a mincha tmeya? It's referring to someone who brings his mincha. He learns Torah. He learns a bit tahira. Noise isha va'acha kach loy me Torah. Which, by the way, that's a kiyodua, big machlokes in the Gemara. Kedusha chavtes a beis rechaim b'tzavari v'yasik b'Torah. The Gemara says. But either way, says the Gemara, the pasuk says, Shira malos hine baruch es Hashem kol avdei Hashem ha'imdim beveis Hashem baleilos. My baleilos. Who are these people that are imdim beveis Hashem baleilos at night, kilu, not by day? Rabbi Yechon says, Tamid Chacham, it's referring to Tamid Chacham. Ma'iskim ba'Torah balayla. They learn Torah not only by Yom, right? By Yom, when it's klar and when it's gishmired, sometimes it's not so hard. But they learn afilu balayla. They learn mitoichat chak. Mala aleim hakasav. The Torah considers it ki'ilu asukim ba'avoida. Torah considers it as if they're being oisik in avoida. Lo'olam zoisal Yisrael. This pasuk is in Divrei Hayamim. It's referring to Shlomo Melech's Beis Hamikdash, and it says he built the Beis Hamikdash. It's going to be lo'olam. Is it lo'olam? The Beis Hamikdash was not lo'olam. Amar Rav Gidol Marav. It's a mizbeach bani. It's referring to a mizbeach. Umichol saragadol oimer the makraval of carbon. And even though we don't have the avoida in the literal sense, lo'olam, but at the same time, the Malach Michal, he brings karbanis. The last place of Menachos, which is famous, we've spoken about it several times over the years, says that what are these karbanis? It's nishmasin shal Yisrael. And that's what we mean when we say in Ritzei, v'isha Yisrael, usfilasam meheira ba'ahavas kabel baratzim. What's the isha Yisrael? The isha Yisrael, we don't have isha Yisrael today, right? We're hoping we're going to have, so some learn v'hashev as ha'avoidul v'reisechav isha Yisrael. Usfilasam meheira, usfasvad, ba'ahavas kabel baratzim, right? But some people say no, it's the Isha Yisrael usilas emer b'havas kabel baratzin. So what are the Isha Yisrael? So Tosfos says right here, the Isha Yisrael, Mishnah Berurah brings it in Hilchas Shemon Esrei, that the Isha Yisrael is referring to Nishmas and Shal Yisrael. But the bottom line is that's the pshat and Olam Zoyis. Rabbi Yechon said a different pshat. He says no, in line of what we just said. Elu Tamid Chachamim. It's referring to the Tamid Chachamim. Ha'asukim b'Hilchas Avodah, Isaac and Hilchas Avodah, Mal Alei Makosov ki ilu nivna mikdash b'yameh. They literally have the Beis Hamikdash. You know, we always talk about how ve'ein shir akatera azois, that b'makom the dalar amashal halacha, there's no churban Beis Hamikdash. Right? The lumdis, we've spoken this out from Rabbi Shu'abah many times, that the reason you're allowed to eat by a siyam during the 9 days is not because the siyam is doicha the avelos of the 9 days, but b'makom simchas hateres nitokain avelos. The avelos has no makom there. Like we say, ve'ein shir in the churban rakatera azois. Shir is the taich that the churban was never mashpia. It's mamish this Gemara right here. That Talmidei Chachamim ha'asukim b'Hilchas Avodah mala aleim ha'kosar kilu nivna mikdash. They mamish have the Beis Hamikdash. There's no churban base. Some shot is a churban, but they're bringing karbanis. There's no churban b'chlal. It's ki'ilu nivna mikdash b'yamei. Rish Lakish said also this idea. Ma'idich said what's pshat in the pasuk that says ois ha'Torah la'oila u'lamincha l'chatus u'la'asham kol oisik b'Torah. If someone's oisik b'Torah ki'ilu hikrav oila mincha chatus ha'asham. Amar Rav said hay la'oila u'mincha b'bayileh. If pshat in that pasuk is that it's as if you brought an oil, it's as if you brought a mincha, brought a chatz, brought a asham, well then it shouldn't have said lo oila, it should have said oila. Right? It shouldn't have said ula mincha. It should have said u mincha without the lamed. The lamed is not mashma that way. Elamai Rava said, let me tell you what the lamed is doing. If someone learns Torah, again, it's a nuance. But the point is, the way we teach the lamed, this is like in Mesachnes Sedarim. Right? The person says lichulin. Remember those gemaras, lichulin, lachulin, loichulin. But there's a musik that the lamed in the beginning of the word sometimes means loy. And that's what's going on over here. Not the pshat that if you're oisik in kachim, it's as if you're bringing the kachim. It's a very similar punchline, but it's the opposite. If someone is Isaac in kachim, he gets kapara from the Torah lane, at that finish unkumin, he doesn't have to come on to the kachim. Says the Gemara. One more drash. Rabbi Yitzchak said, Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, Ma'idich siv zois teres achatos, v'zois teres ha'asham. Kol oisik b'teres chatos, ki'ilu hikrav chatos, v'chol oisik b'teres asham, ki'ilu hikrav asham. The bottom line is, if you do a sikum on this last Gemara, you'll see there were 6 drashas. all saying the same idea. That if somebody learns Torah, it's as if he brought karbanis. Right? That's the inyan that comes out. The Gemara says it's referring to the Talmid Chacham that are iskim b'Torah. B'chol makom malani aleim kilu maktiru magishin l'shmi. We had the Gemara that talks about the chevra that are imdim beveis Hashem b'aleilos, and Rabbi Yochanan says referring to the Talmid Chacham that are iskim b'Torah b'alayla, and it's malani aleim kilu that are asukim b'avoda. We had Rabbi Yochanan's other memra that Talmid Chachamim that are iskim in hilchas avoda. They're oisik in these halachis. It's malani alem kilu nivna beis hamikdash be'emem. They literally have the beis hamikdash. We had the Joshua Zayis HaTorah la'oilo lemincha lechatus ul'asham. Someone's Zayis HaTorah, he brought the oilo, the mincha, the chatus and the asham. Rava said a little bit differently. It's loy mincha, loy chatus, loy asham. You don't need the chatus asham. And then we had Rish Lakish's memra, Zayis Torah sachatas, Zayis Torah sa'asham, kol oisa b'Torah sachatas, kilu of chatas, kol oisa b'Torah sa'asham, kilu of asham. All these drushes are me'inyan le'inyan ba'isa. They're all very famous. Very often they're all interchanged as well, right? So it's not uncommon to hear because it's really 6 drushes by 5 different Amayram. There's 2 Rabbi Yochanans, but if you even go through the different Amayram were coming from different angles. There's a Beis HaMikdash, you're doing the avoida, you're bringing specific karbanis, metafnish onkumins and karbanis. You're literally this second in Eretz Yisrael in the makom of avoida, right? So there's a lot of different nuance, and each nuance comes with its own series of rate. But the bottom line is, when you go through the Gemara properly, what you see is it's really 6 different memories from 5 different Amiram, darshaning and drushting away several different psukim. Either way, the last Mishnah here in Menachos Menachos. Sagt the Heilige Mishnah. Nema ba'ilas behema ishe reach nichayach. Uba'ilas ha'oif. It also says ishe reach nichayach. Ubemincha it also says ishe reach nichayach. Lo imelacha echad amam v'echad amam v'ufad sheyichav and libe l'shamayim. So as the karbanis we know can come in different shapes and sizes. You would think if somebody brings a big carbon, the Torah would describe it one way. If somebody brings a lesser carbon, the Torah would describe it in a lesser way. But no. The oilas behema, the oilas ha'oif, and the mincha, 3 very, very different karbanos in terms of what the cost is. And afilu hachi, the Torah says in all 3 places the same thing. Yisherech nechayach Hashem. You know what you see from here? That really the Eibush doesn't care so much about the size of the check. Echad hamarba ve'echad hamamit. What the Eibush really wants, Rachmana liba boy. Ubelchvad sheyichad ben liba l'shamayim. Zok the Gemara. Omer Reb Zera said, Mikra, what's the makar to this? What's the pasuk to this inyan? That really what the Eibush cares about is sheyichad ben liba l'shamayim. So Reb Zera said, it's one from the following pasuk, Mesukesh nasa oived, im ma'at v'im harbe, Yoichel. Mesukesh nasa ovid. The ovid over here is referring to the person who's ovid HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Specifically, is bringing a carbon, right? We're going on a Mishnah that's talking about karbanas. The sleep, the shina of the ovid is mesuka. It's very, very zis. And it doesn't matter in ma'at v'im harbe, whether he brings a lot or he brings a little. Right? Echad hamamit ve'echad hamarbe. The seder of the pasuk. It doesn't matter what he's bringing. Yoichel, as long as he's doing it with the richtige kavana, he's going to eat. He's going to get whatever he was supposed to get. Learned it from a different pasuk. It says, "Bervois hatoiva rabu oichleha uma kishoin lebailov." Bervois hatoiva. If a person brings a big carbon, he brought a lot of toiv. A lot of people are going to be able to eat from it. However, what really does HaKadosh Baruch Hu have from it? HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the Bailam, and you need the end of the pasuk. Rashi says, "Ki imra useinav." That Eibush is going to look at the person. He's going to see, was his kavanah good? Then it's gavaldik. Meaning, if you bring a big carbon, rabu oichla, that you're going to get. I mean, you can't deny that. A big piece of meat is going to feed more people. There's no shayla. But l'maisa, if you want to know what the Eibush is going to get from it, ru'useinav. Because echad amar b'echad amam, what the Eibush really cares about is ubachvad sheyichab and libe l'shamayim. Tanya, Reb Shimon ben Yazai. Reb Shimon ben Yazai said, "Boy, what's Why is it? By the parsha of the karbanos, shloi nema bahem loy kale, right? It doesn't say the word kale. V'loy elokim. It doesn't say the word elokim. El havaya. Every single time you see a carbon, the Torah talks about Ishareach Nichayach Lahavaya. It always says Havaya. What's the reason for this? So Ben Azai explains because we didn't want the Pischem Pet to say Chalila and somebody should say maybe karbanos are going to Kel, Elikim, Havaya. So no, all the karbanos go to Havaya. Meaning even though these are real names of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and you have Yomer, Hashem, Vayedaber Elikim, right? Then you do find the names of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in an interchangeable way. Throughout Tefillah you find that you have the 7 names of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and you have the Shivim Shemesh al HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and you have every single word in the Torah, Shmois of Shal HaKadosh Baruch Hu. There are many names, but when it came to Karbanos, we didn't want the Pischem Peh, or the Baldin should have a Pischem Peh Lachloik, so therefore we were very sensitive and we only words the Yer Havaya. By the way, this Inyan, if it sounds familiar, we've spoken about this first in the Ramban al Atayr and Parsh Vayetze is Meirich al Derech Soyd about what this Inyan means. We went back at a tshuva from the Shar Ephraim with the Sid Rabbi Yosef al Masnino who gave up a drasha and they were roided from afterwards. But either way, I am related raid bites. Zok the Gemara. V'nemar. The Brisa continues. This is all Reb Shimon ben Azai's Brisa. It says b'shar agas regarding the gross shar ishareach nichayach u'ba'if adak by the if that's very small it says ishareach nichayach u'b'mincha which is none of the above it says ishareach nichayach lo'imelacha echad amabret echad amamit u'belvad she'echabim liben l'Hashemayim. The Brisa continues and says v'shem atoyim al achilu hutzarach. After learning Kachem, it's possible that a person might think, maybe there's an Indian you can learn Psukim Pshutei Shal Mikra, and you'll think that maybe the Eivishter likes food, and the reason we bring karbanis is to feed HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Which, by the way, if you look into Rishonim and the Mefarshei Apshat, there's mukim for a person to say that. And if there was no mukim for a person to say it, we'd have a brisa addressing it, right? This is not the same as the Baldin who's coming and he's tiny shtei rishus. This person's learning chumash, and he's saying v'asuli mikdash is a bias for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And at the end of the day, the reason there's a menorah and there's a shulchan is because if you walk into a house, there's electricity and there's a table. And the reason you bring HaKadosh Baruch Hu karbanos in the morning and the evening, because a person usually eats pas shachris and then he eats pas bein arbai. Right? There's mokum to say that, and the Torah even refers to the karbanos as hey yachal b'shtei achilas hakasim medaber. Right? The concept of achilas mizbeach and the Sachim is give HaKadosh Baruch Hu a little bit of yayin, and the pasuk on top of everything says Ishareach Nichayach L'Hashem, which by the way, that's why it's in this brisa. We're talking about the Reach Nichayach. There's a certain fargenigin that the Eibishter has. It sounds like from Karbanis. So it says the pasuk of Hashem, Toimer Lachi Lehu Tzarech. You might think that HaKadosh Baruch Hu needs these Karbanis. The Eibishter needs the food. Says the Gemara Talmud Loimar. The pasuk says, and this is in Tehillim Perek Nun, and the Gemara now is going to darshan a few psukim in a row. It says Im Erav Loi Oimar Lach. If I'm hungry, says HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I'm not going to tell you, give me some food, because the whole world is mine. V'nemar, it says, Ki li kol chaysei yar, behemois b'harei olaf, yodati koloif harim, v'ziz sadai imadi. Right, every movement of the field, ziz sadai imadi is with me. Ha'ichol b'sar abirin, v'dam atu demeshte, what, I need your little bit of blood, I need your little bit of basar. Mamash HaPasuk Edom, that's addressing this point. Le'amarti aleichem zivchu, and then the Brisa continues, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, I didn't tell you, shech karbanos, k'dei shetoima eser ritzoyin v'yas. I mean, don't think I need your karbanis and fakert. I'm telling you, bring me something, and I'm motivating you by telling you I'll give you something good in return. Right? That's not what's going on over here. This is not about me. So I don't want you to think this is for me, but rather this is 100%. This is 100% for you. Another pshat on what means. It means that if you're going to go ahead and you're going to bring a carbon, you have to do it l'daitchem. I mean, you can't bring a carbon and just bring the carbon. You have to have das. You have to have das, right? You have to have das when you bring a carbon. Rashi says, as opposed to what? As opposed to mesasik, based on this next Gemara. Shmuel asked Rafuna the following question: how do you know that if someone's mesasik bekachim, he's possible? Meaning, how do you know the carbon is possible? Remember, the pasuk says, "V'shachat has ben habakar," and we learn from here, "Shetei shchita l'shum ben bakar," that the shchita has to be l'shum ben bakar. He told him, "Zubi yadeinu." We knew this already. Shmuel told Rafuna, "I knew the pasuk of v'shachat has ben habakar. I want to know how do you know shina Shmina Kosav Le'akev. Talmud Leimer, so he told them, L'rtzoinchem tizbechu, L'rtzoinchem zivchu, L'daitchem zivchu. He told them, Amish, this drasha. He told them that it has to be l'daitchem. If somebody's a misasek when he brings a carbon, it's not going to be okay. And it's on this note, with this drasha, which, by the way, if you think about it, what was the last drasha that we just saw? First of all, the fact that Zvachim Menachos ends with a drasha is very befitting. But what's the idea, what's the subject of this drasha? It's the kavana that a person had to have. B'shas he did shchita, right? B'shas he did avoid, he had to have kavana. How did Zvachim start? Zvachim start kol ha-zvachim shenizbechu shloi l'shman ksherim elo shloi olu l'bayim l'shem chayva. Right? It started with the kavana that a person has to have b'shas shchita. It's exactly how it ends. It started that you can't have a machshava shloi l'shma. It ends that you can't be a misasik. But the bottom line is, mamish would be mekasha the tchila and the soif. It's rachmana libaboy. It's the machshava that a person has to have at the time that he goes and brings the carbon. And on that note, Hadron Allah, Harei Olai Isaroin, Uslik Allah, Menachos Menachos. But just to end with one ha'ara. So, the Gemara here on Daf Kuf Yud Menachos Menachos brought all the drashas with regards to the idea that if somebody learns Kachim, right? Someone's Oisik B'Teres Achatas, he's Oisik B'Teres Ha'oila, Teres Asham, or more appropriately for today, someone's Oisik B'Teres HaMincha. It's Nechshav, it's Malo Olav HaKosov, as if he brought Karbanas. And 6 different drushes that go about and bring this point. The Chassam Sofer, in many shtiklach, this is in Chassam Sofer Ala Torah, it's in Teres Moshe, it's in the Jushin V'Agodis, the drushes that he gave in Dresnitz. This is permeated throughout the Svarim of the Heilig Chassam Sofer. He says that Parshas Sav begins, Saves Aharon V'Ezbonov Leimor Zois Teiras Ha'oila. So we have 2 parashas right in the beginning of the Teiras Kohanim that talk about Karbonis. Yeah, Parshas Vayikra and Parshas Sav. We mentioned a few times throughout the course of Zvachim Menachos that the Ramban al Torah says that in Parshas Vayikra the Torah introduces all the karbanas, but it doesn't mention all the halachas. Parshas Sav the Torah goes and rounds out all the different halachas, and that's why the lashon and the way all these psukim are introduced is Zois Teras Ha'oila. Meaning, I'm going to tell you now the rest of the halachas that are negei the oila. Zois Teras Hachatas, Zois Teras Ha'asham, Zois Teras HaMincha, because you know already what the oila is and what the chatas is and what the asham is and the mincha is. But now I'm going to give you all the diktuki halachas. And really, in Parshas Sav, we're being mashlim the Teras Ha'oila and all these different things that we didn't have already. In Parshas Vayikra. But the pasuk, and really this whole parsha, the part 2 of the Seder HaKarbonis in the Torah Shabbat begins with the word Sav. It's the name of the parsha. Sav es Aharon ve'ezbonov leimar. And the question is why? Vayikra doesn't start Sav, it starts Vayikra. That word Sav, that lashon, is something you find here in Parshas Sav, obviously. In the part 2, you don't find it in Parshas Vayikra. So Chassam Sofer said that if you take a look at Rashi says in Chumash, Kamokim shenemer b'it Sav, hu miyadu l'deiros. It means I'm commanding you something that's negeya now, but I'm commanding you something that's negeya l'deiros as well. Says the Chassam Sofer that the Ikar Parish of the Karbonis was not Miyad U'Ladairis. The Ikar Parish of the Karbonis had a gvul. When there was a Beis HaMikdash, you were able to bring Karbonis. But there's one element, there's one component of Karbonis, of Kachim, that's Negei Miyad U'Ladairis. And you know what that is? It's Zois Teres Ha'oila. It's Zois Teres Ha'chata, Zois Teres Ha'asham, Zois Teres Ha'mincha. It's the 6 drushes that the Gemara brings them in Menachos Daf Kuf Yud. So this chelik of the parsha that includes in it not only the inyan of this is the way you bring an oila, this is the way you bring a chatas, but there's a musig of Kala Oisik B'Teres Oilas Kilo Ikar Vayla. The Kala Oisik B'Teres Achatas Kilo Ikar Chatas. Which, by the way, this is in Parshas Sav, because Parshas Sav is being mashlam all the Inyani Karbonis. So part of the Hashlama of understanding Inyani Karbonis is chapping this Inyan. That B'etzim is something I could do everywhere. So how do you preface Zois Teres Oila? It's Sav Aron Vesban of Lemar. Savu Miyadu L'Deiris. Vayikra is not Miyadu L'Deiris. Leider. Because Mipnei Chato Einu Galinu Me'artzeinu Ve'ena but Parshas Sav, which has in its Teres Ha'oila, that's why it's prefaced by that word, a word that means Miyad L'Deiris. This is a ha'ara that Chassam Sofer repeated over and over and over again in his Svarim. I just want to tell you, Hergish Nifla, that I saw in the Zoisli Yaakov from Agoyin Agadol, Reb Shmuel Yankov, Zecher Tzadik v'Kodesh L'Vracha. It's his first piece in Zoisli Yaakov in Parshas Sav. He brings the Baal HaTurim. Baal HaTurim on this pasuk. Tzavis Saharim Vesbanav Leimar, Zois Teres Ha'oila, Hi Ha'oila. Sagt the Baal HaTurim, Loimar, this pasuk is coming to say that Kol Ha'oisek B'Teres Ha'oila, Kihilu Hikra V'oila. Zois Teres Ha'oila is coming to teach me this inyan, Menachos, Daf Kuf Yod. And then the Baal HaTurim goes a little bit weiter. He says a little bit of a pirush on our Gemara. HaKarbanos Nikru Isha. You find that Karbanos are called Isha, fire. V'Torah Nikras Eish. The Torah is also called fire. Shenemar haloi koi dvarai ke'esh no'om Hashem. Miminoi eish das lamai. In fact, the Baal HaTurim says das lamai is oisius Talmud. Eish das lamai. Talmud is eish. Torah is a shtick fire. HaKarbanos nikru lechem, sagt the Baal HaTurim weiter. Karbanos are called bread. Es karbanai lachmi. V'Torah nikras lechem. L'chu lachmu belachmi. Kashem she'ef shel oilam b'loi lechem, kach ef shel oilam b'loi Torah. As I state in Baal HaTurim. So Reb Shmuel Yankov said, what's the oimik of this Baal HaTurim? Baal HaTurim is saying that when a person brought a carbon, what was the inyan? It was an isherech nichayach l'Hashem. You're bringing a fire for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. You're bringing lechem to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The emes is the fire of Isherech L'Chayich L'Hashem you have in the Torah. Haloi koi dvarai ke'esh no'om Hashem. Eish das lamai, Talmud is eish. And that lechem that HaKadosh Baruch Hu talks about in Parshas Pinchas be'etzem, you have when you're learning Torah. L'chu lachmu belachmi. Lechem, yef shelo oilam b'loi lechem, nu. Through Torah, you mekayim the olam. That's something that be'etzem you get through Torah. So really, all the nekudas that a person should get from bringing a carbon, you get through learning Torah. And that's the oimik of when a person learns Torah. When a person learns Torah, this, on some level, he's bringing karbanis, or you don't need karbanis, pick the nusach that you prefer, but the bottom line is, it's related to this inyan. Reb Shmuel Yankov said, so what's the oimik? He said, because at the end of the day, an oila is a unique type of Isha. It's a unique type of lechem. It has its halachas. It's kulay kolol. It's l'mayla michot hasikra. Those nekudas that you can't get from learning Shnai Moichs and Betalis. We're getting l'mayla mich a fire. Oh, fire you get. The ish dos lomay avada. From Horoving on Toysus and Ansahadi Rabbeinu Tam and Bam Mitzid Apez, you're going to get that. Oh, but wood the oila. So for that, kol oisik b'toras ha'oila is ki'ilik r'voila. When a person's oisik b'toras ha'oila, so now you have the fire, you have the lechem. What's felt? The nusach v'noila? I have the nusach v'noila. That's the sugi I'm learning. I'm learning the sugi of oila. I have the isha. I have the lechem from the mincha. What's the problem? I'm not learning Menachos. I'm learning something else. The teretz is, but if I'm oisik b'Menachos, now I get the mincha. That's what the Baal HaTurim, that's the oimik, that's the Shishiva they get cook on this Baal HaTurim. The Torah is b'chefze isha, it's b'chefze lech. It doesn't matter what you're learning, it's fire. It doesn't matter what you're learning, it's lechem. It's just that when you learn oilos, and now the fire is a fire from oila. It's a kulay kol of oila. That's why kol is b'toras oilos kilu g'oila. And the same is true for chatas, and the same is true for minchas oivayte. But then Rabbi Shmuel Yankov just feared us with one hergish, one taich. He said that we know Chazal say that by the bris bein Avsar, Kodesh Baruch Hu promised Avram Avinu a lot of things. And Avram Avinu said, right? How am I going to know? How do I know it's going to play itself out? Amalei, so he told him, Cheli egla mishuleshes. Amalei, tenef bezman shebeis hamikdash kayim. Bezman she'ein beis hamikdash kayim matei aleh. But what's going to be when there's no beis hamikdash? Amalei, so he told him, Kfarti kanti lam seder karbanos. Shekol zman shekoyrim behen. As long as they koyrim the karbanos, malani aleim kilu ekrivu lefanai karbin, vani moicha lohem al kol avinoseim. That if they're going to read the parsha of the karbanos, I'll be machshiv it as if they brought karbanos. I'm going to be moichel all the karbanis. Sagt Reb Shmuel Yankov, I'm reading it inside. Nimtzeinu lemedim. The hachin yana de ki'ilu hikra v'oilu hu miyuchad l'zman ha'galas. She'ein beis hamikdash kayim. When there's a beis hamikdash, we brought karbanis. We brought karbanis by bringing karbanis. Aber tenach bizman she beis hamikdash kayim. Bizman she'ein beis hamikdash kayim matei aleim. Amalem kfarti kanti lohem. I gave them a mahalach of how to bring karbanis in the galas. And that is the Seder karbanis. Seder Karbonis is the way in Golus we go ahead and we're makriv Karbonis. Ulefize yesh lefarish apasik. Zois teres ha'oila hi ha'oila al moikta al mizbeach kol halayla ad boiker. Da Golus kruya layla ki yadua. We know that Golus is referred to as layla. Va geula kruya boiker k'dechsev ama shomer asa boiker. V'hainu, what the pasuk is saying is Zois teres ha'oila. That I'm telling you, there's an Indian of kol ha'isik b'teres ha'oila is ki'ilu hikravayla. But you should know, hi ha'oila. This oila that I'm giving you right now, al moikta al mizbeach kol halayla. That's the way you're going to bring an oila on the mizbeach kol halayla throughout the Golus, ad boiker, until it's going to be omash shomer asa boiker, and at that point it's going to be a Beis Hamikdash, and then we'll be able to bring the oilas again on the Beis Hamikdash, and at that point it's already going to be different. Just to end, the pasuk says, "Vayidaber Hashem al Moshe mitzaves b'nei Yisrael v'yamarta aleim es karboni lachmi liishai reach nichoichi tishmeru lahakriv libe mayadai." The Heilige Sam Sofer touched. Tzaves b'nei Yisrael v'yamarta aleim. Bring the carbon tamid, right? That's what this is. This is the tamid shel shacha and the tamid shel bein arbaim. Es karboni lachmi liishai. The Eibishter said, "Es karboni lachmi." You're going to bring my karbonos liishai. Liishai. The aleph is 1,000. The lamed shin and yud is 340. The Chassam Sofer said that if you do the math, the amount of years that Klal Yisrael had a Makom HaMikdash, it was 1,340. We had the Mishkan for 480 years, Berech. We had Bayis Rishon for 410 years, and we had Bayis Sheni for 420 years. So the Chassam Sofer taich, Tzaves b'nei Yisrael v'yamartam aleim, it's karboni lachmi, I'm giving you my karbonis, it's going to be leishai. That you're going to have for 1,340 years. Reach nichoichi, and through that you're going to give me a reach nichoich. But afterwards, the Chassam Sofer said, Tishmeru, you're going to have to wait. V'loshin v'aviv shamar es hadavar lahakriv libe mayadai, to be able to bring karbonis again. For 1,340 years, you're going to have as karboni lachmi. You're going to have reach nichoichi, you'll be able to bring karbonis. But then you're going to have to wait for the gula asida. Tishmeru, the Yidden are going to wait. And they're going to daven v'Yerushalayim mircha, and they're going to daven es semach David, and they're going to daven v'isha Yisrael u'sfilas and meher b'havas kabel b'ratzain. They're going to daven and they're going to wait again, Tishmeru lahakriv libe mayadai. But it struck me, how does this pasuk start? It starts Tzaves b'nei Yisrael v'yamarta aleim. Same way Parshas Tzav starts. Tzaves b'nei Yisrael v'yamarta aleim. And Tzav, even though Rashi doesn't say it here in Parshas Pinchas, but Rashi was megalatas already in Parshas Tzav what it means. It means miyadu l'deiros. That as much as it's true, Tzaves b'nei Yisrael v'yamarta aleim is karboni lachmi l'ishai, that we only have kachim for 1,340 years. Tishmeru, we're waiting to bring the karbonos in the oifen where it's going to be taka bringing karbonos kipshutai. But even in the interim, we have the tzav miyadu l'deiros. We're able to be makai, and we're able to do the avodah of zois teres ha'oila, zois teres ha'chatas, zois teres ha'asham. Just to end, we're middle of the Yemei Sfira. After we tell Sfira, we say harachaman hu yachzor lanu avodas beis hamikdash l'mkoima b'mher b'yameinu amen sela. We once said, what's the lashon l'mkoima? Obviously, harachaman hu yachzor lanu avodas beis hamikdash l'mkoima. What, not l'mkoima? If it's not l'mkoima, it's shchut eichotz. But the teretz is, he says, now we're in Golus, and when we're in Golus, b'chal makom mukta mugash l'shmi. Now we're bringing we have all the keilus. We finish Zvachim, we finish Menachos, the Keilus we have. But our tefillah is Harachaman, Hu Yachzor Lanu Avodas Beis Hamikdash L'Mkoima. We should be Zoicha to be able to bring not the Zois Teres Oila of Hiya Oila Al Moit Al Mizbeach Kol Halayla, but it should be Amash Shomer Asa Boiker. The Eibush should be Megal himself, and he should say, Asa Boiker, look outside. The Boiker, the sun has risen, and it's never going to set again. The Geula Hasida. Amen.